Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this Research Design Service Southeast event. My name is Claire Austin, and I'll just be introducing the session today, which is our Research Journey Lunchtime Seminar. We are very fortunate today to have two researchers who are going to share their experiences with their research career with us. But before I introduce them, I just wanted to go through about how we will be running the session today. So we are recording the session, as you can probably see, and the video will be made available to all participants and will also be up on our website after the session, so you can revisit it and share it. Please keep yourself on mute and feel free to turn your video off if you don't want to be displayed. We're really keen that you get the most out of this session and the experiences being shared. So we'd really encourage you to use the chat function to ask any questions you may have of our speakers as they give their talks. And then we're going to dedicate the last 20 minutes of the session to your questions and hear their thoughts on them. So without further ado, I will introduce our speakers. So we're very fortunate today to have two leading researchers, Professor Simon Skene, who is a medical statistician and director of the Surrey Clinical Trials Unit and Clinical Research Facility, and Professor Jackie Castle, who's a public health clinician and Deputy Dean of the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. And thank you very much, both of you, for joining us.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and pass over to Simon, who is going to talk first. Thank you.
Sorry, Claire, a few technical difficulties. I'm just making sure I can share my screen and then I will absolutely get going.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
And this was after having had a practice as well. So I think we're there. Right. Am I full screen now?
Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so thanks very much, Claire, for the introduction. And it's fantastic to have the opportunity to be here and speak to everyone today. It's a little bit unusual to be talking about my research journey rather than about research itself. So, I mean, I hope I get the tone right. But I'm going to just start by, Claire gave a very nice introduction, but just start by showing a picture of the building that we work in. It looks much more idyllic in the photograph than it does in real life. But this is the clinical research building at the University of Surrey, where the clinical trials unit, the clinical research facility, and the sleep centre are all based. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we came to be there and the kind of research that we're doing. But I guess start with a kind of more formal introduction. So as Claire said, I'm Simon Skene. I'm a Professor of Medical Statistics, Director of the Clinical Trials Unit and Clinical Research Facility at the University of Surrey. And as if that wasn't enough, I also take the position as head of the Department of Clinical and Experimental Medicine there. So, I mean, there's a lot of different roles there, but they're all absolutely concerned with forwarding and encouraging engagement in clinical research. And I see myself fundamentally as a trialist and medical statistician, and these other roles are all parts of facilitating that. Just one very quick exclaimer, and I'd like to thank Ben Goldacre for this, pointing it out, but just to make absolutely clear, despite all the range of accolades on the screen, my full medical title is Simon. Okay, so I'm not clinically qualified, but I do engage massively in clinical research. So what is the role of the statistician in clinical research? So just start with the idea, there's a very famous quote by R.A. Fisher, who was probably one of the most famous statisticians and founding fathers of kind of experimental design and the techniques that came on to be used within clinical trials. And he said, to consult the statistician after an experiment is finished is often merely to ask him to conduct a post-mortem examination. He can perhaps say what the experiment died of. So first of all, we have to sort of apologize for the non-politically correct use of pronouns, but it was 1938 when Fisher said this. But what he was really saying is that, statisticians aren't just people that you come along to with a spreadsheet once you've done an experiment and ask them to help analyze it. A good relationship with the statistician is to have that dialogue going right from the beginning when a research question is being formulated, so we can ensure that the correct methodology is being used, the correct data is being recorded, and therefore the correct analysis will ensue, and that the decisions we make regarding the research are going to be robust. So what about the roles of statistician in clinical trials? Well, the Grey Book, the Good Clinical Practice Guide, says that those advising on the trial design and statistical methodology and analysing clinical trial data must demonstrate relevant statistical qualifications and experience. So there you go. In GCP, there's actually a very strong recommendation that we need to have appropriately qualified and experienced statisticians. Unfortunately, they don't actually go on to define what appropriate qualifications and experience are. But I'll take you through my journey, and hopefully you'll see that I'm somewhat qualified as both a statistician and a trialist, and then we'll talk about the kind of work that I'm involved in now. So by way of background, and it would be nice to show a very succinct, nice timeline of education followed by experience. I've had a slightly different introduction into my academic career. So the first thing to say is maths and statistics wasn't the first subject that I studied. I actually studied architecture when I first left school. I was torn between science and art and sort of chose the one thing that seemed to combine them. But after a few years soul searching, decided that actually, I can't avoid the need to study further mathematics. So around 1994, I went back to the Open University and did a degree that coincided with the birth of our first child. So I actually combined home caring responsibilities with studying. I managed to get my degree in a couple of years with the OU. I was so dedicated and enamored with the whole OU experience that I then carried on there as a teacher and lecturer with them for the next 12 years, teaching a range of mathematics and statistics subjects. I guess my absolute love of statistics, when I was studying maths, I was kind of moved from my wife's experience. She's also a mathematician. She studied pure maths and had always regretted not doing something more applied with it because she was never really able to use that experience in real life. So following that, I decided that I'd take statistics alongside maths so that there was some kind of practical outlet. And during my studies, I was absolutely enamored by the whole idea of statistics. And it's not something that many mathematicians like, because mathematicians like certainty, whereas statistics deals with uncertainty. But somehow that was something that stuck with me. And so following that, I went on to do an MSc in applied stats and operational research at Birkbeck. And that was where I really got into the idea of sort of medical statistics, and some of the subject matter that I chose there was around methodological techniques that were massively relevant within medical statistics, particularly looking at analysis of repeated measures, so data which is collected in time. And then following the same pattern of kind of sticking with things, when I finished my MSc at Birkbeck, I carried on teaching there alongside the Open University while I did my PhD part-time at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And there I was fully embedded in the medical statistics unit. It's now called the Medical Statistics Department. There was always a lot of fun poked at the unit for MSU. So those of you who are clinically qualified, of course, that's midstream urine, and the medical statistics unit was changed to Medical Statistics Department. And I did my PhD directly within the area of medical statistics, and again, particularly looking at how to deal with the idea of repeated measurements data, which is included in time. And throughout that, I mean, there was a very early moment of reckoning, so that my supervisor was someone called Mike Kenward, who used to be at the University of Kent. I don't know whether some of you may remember him from years ago. He's just recently retired. But he was taken on at the London School of Hygiene predominantly to try and up the quality of the statistical methodology that they used there in support of trials. And there was another well-known professor there who was Stuart Pocock, who's been quite seminal in clinical trial methodology and has written a very good book on it. And he took me apart the very first presentation I gave when I was showing my new methodology, and he just said, well, what's the point of it? Who's going to use it? So that drummed into me very early on, and as if I hadn't picked it up from the applied statistics background, that it's very important that you don't pursue methodology for its own sake. That the statistical methodology in applied research at least should be motivated by real problems, and you know, which is a good lesson and something that I've taken with me. So as I said, you know, I had long association with each of these three universities. At Birkbeck, I went on to become a full lecturer in statistics following my PhD, working on the applied stats program that I'd been part of, and I introduced a new pathway as part of their applied stats MSc program, which was in medical applications. And it was during that time, and I was having some consultancy with the pharmaceutical industry, that I started to yearn for actually, rather than teaching and showing people how to use statistics, to actually be doing it in a much more applied fashion and doing it for myself. So that led to a move to actually becoming a full-time clinical trialist, and I joined the Comprehensive Clinical Trials Unit at UCL. And I joined them at a very good time. They'd only just been set up and launched within UCL. So UCL already had 3 clinical trials units. The MRC Clinical Trials Unit had just joined UCL. They also had Priment, who dealt with primary care and mental health, and they had the CR UK UCL Cancer Trials Centre. And there used to be a lot of kind of complaints from investigators at UCL that each of these 3 units, whilst excellent, really catered for specific types of trials, and yet that didn't cover the full gambit, if you like, or the full range of research that people were interested in at UCL, particularly having 2 medical schools. And so the UCL Comprehensive Clinical Trials Unit was formed. Some of us hated the name, but actually it did say what it was, and that was, you know, we take on any trial. And it was a tremendous kind of launch pad and you know, pond to get involved in. You just never knew what was coming in through the door. So rather than, you know, if you were working in pharma or something like that, you know, you might just work on one therapeutic area. And if you're working in cancer, you might only ever do a survival analysis, you know, whereas this was something where we took on lots of different trials and took them through. So, and it was also a time that I, you know, really started to learn that that statistics was fully embedded within trials, and that the best trials were where it was a real partnership between the methodologists, you know, and including the statisticians and the clinical academics. And some of those relationships that formed early on trials there are still going strong today. So I was with the Comprehensive Clinical Trials Unit for about 5 years. And that spanned the time from them being initially set up to getting provisional registration and then full registration with the UK CRC. Around that point, you know, having been involved in all stages of setting up and helping grow the unit there, I was enticed with the idea of becoming a director of a trials unit in my own right. And so those of you who work with trials units probably know that you know, there are 50 trials units around the country, or 54 registered trials units around the country. It's about 50-50 whether they're led by a clinician or a statistician, and that really does, you know, represent, as I said, this real partnership between methodology and clinical medicine in terms of running the trials. So I was enticed down to Surrey with the idea of doing something similar to the done in UCL, having a trials unit that didn't specify in any one area, because it should reflect the needs of the university and the local region. You know, we are fully embedded in Kent, Surrey, and Sussex, and that's the area we predominantly we want to deliver. The trials unit had been launched there around 2015, had been provisionally registered in 2017, and they were looking for a full-time director to supplement the fantastic work that had been done by Aggie Michael, my predecessor, to try and take it to the next level and achieve registration. And so I've been at Surrey ever since. And, you know, there have been some developments along the way in terms of, you know, looking at restructuring the trials unit. Then they asked me if I could restructure what was then the clinical research centre alongside it, which meant combining a clinical trials unit and a research facility, which was not what was originally on my agenda, but has been a fascinating experience, because now managing sites and also being part of a site is has been a very educational thing. And then for my sins in that, I was also asked to take on responsibility for the Department of Clinical and Experimental Medicine, which houses these facilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But first of all, clinical trials units, because, as I said, I see myself absolutely fundamentally through and through as a statistician trialist. And so clinical trials units, or CTUs, are specialist units, and they're recognized as having all the components in place to take on the design, the conduct, the analysis, and publication of clinical trials. Not always just clinical trials. I mean, CTUs will get involved in what we say is other well-designed studies. And of course, they should have the capability to provide specialist, expert, statistical, epidemiological, and other methodological advice, but also have all the operational aspects in terms of being able to take on the coordination of trials. And delighted to say that, the Surrey CTU was fully registered in October 2019. So it took 1 year longer than we'd expected when I came along, but we were delighted to get there. And you can see the map on the side there that shows the kind of 54 now registered CTUs around the country. We're delighted that we've also been joined on that list by Brighton. And so Surrey and Brighton, we're not in competition. We're very good links. We're delighted that we have now 2 registered clinical trials units within the region. So in terms of, and I am an academic, and so in terms of thinking about how we're I guess publications and research grants are the metrics the university looks at. Successful trials are my personal metric. So on this slide here, it just shows a selection of papers. These are from 3 separate trials. They're the 3 trials that I started work on when I first joined CCTU in 2013. And all 3 are still ongoing in some aspects. So far, these 3 trials, so one was a repurposing of exenatide, which is a diabetes medication for helping with Parkinson's disease symptoms. The other one was a direct head-to-head comparison of ankle fusion versus ankle replacement for people with end-stage osteoarthritis. And the other one was a trial looking at whether providing albumin to people with complications of cirrhosis led to better outcomes in their in-hospital stays. So these 3 trials alone have already led to 12 publications, and 2 of them still have to get as far as the end trial results. So, so I think that the point being here, I mean, clinical trials can be a very rich way of getting high impact outputs. Each of these papers has much more impact than the methodological papers that I was writing at the beginning of my career. But they can take a long time to produce, so here we are, nearly 8 years since these three trials were funded. All 3 are finished, but 2 still have to be reported. And of course, alongside publications, occasionally you get a few headlines. So this is the only newspaper headline that I had from a trial that I've been involved in, but the exenatide trial, which was a phase 2 proof of concept study, did show some benefit of taking exenatide in Parkinson's symptoms. And of course, the Daily Mail, as always, puts its own spin on that, could stop the disease in its tracks, whereas, I think the paper in the Lancet, which we're very proud of, says could have some beneficial effects and perhaps slowing the progression a little bit, so it's, I think that's one thing that as statisticians we're always concerned in, and that is, the correct interpretation of results. And in terms of funding, I guess, this is a selection of funding that I currently hold. Some of these that I've carried on from UCL, and some of them are now ones that we've done at Surrey. But in terms of NIHR, which is by far the largest funder of clinical research and particularly trials, I currently hold grants with the HTA, EME, RFPB, and Public Health Research. Add to the list, can't tell you which one it is yet, but there's one which is now in contract with HS and DR. So, I work with the idea of, if you're playing NIHR bingo, then it's only a program grant to go before I get to tick all the boxes. I've also been involved with the MRC, so I'm involved in a first in human study at UCL, which is very exciting. And of course, one of the aspects of being involved with the clinical research facility and my original methodological research in small samples is that I'm massively interested in early stage and early phase studies. But there's some charity work there as well. So Diabetes UK, looking at a parent's intervention for disordered eating in children with diabetes. And increasingly, we're starting to get involved in digital health. And so it's great to have this early stage healthy aging catalyst, looking at wearable sensors in older people, looking at cardiovascular health. And I think the move from kind of CTIMPs or drug trials being everything to sort of more behavioral and device-driven interventions is something which is happening in society, and it's definitely something that I'm seeing along the way in my career. So just very briefly, and I'll just rush through these bits so we just try and keep to time. Just wanted to say a little bit about the role, the departmental role that I have at Surrey. So in terms of the Department of Clinical and Experimental Medicine, we're very lucky that we have 6 complementary research sections, all of which fit very well together. So we've got the CTU and the CRF managing trials and actually performing them. We're closely allied with Surrey Sleep Research Centre. So we've got a number of sleep labs controlled by Dirk Jan Dijk, who's world eminent in sleep research. But we're delighted also that we're joined by the Research Design Service Southeast, sit within the department, and we have very close links with that. So I'm a member of the Strategic Management Board, as is our medical director. And of course, our statisticians in the CTU act as statistical advisors. We also have health economics with Heather Gage in the department. And it's also where the clinical academics sit. So in our section of clinical medicine, we have a number of people who hold joint appointments with both the university and other health trusts. And so, so it really is the area in the university that's helping support clinical research. And the latest section to join us, of course, being statistical multi-omics, and this kind of drive to personalized medicine and understanding, genetic factors and things is something that we're really looking at. So I won't concentrate on all these, but just to show that it's, it might be strange, a statistician leading this band, but we do have a band of very influential and important people that we work with. And the ones that I've outlined in red are those who give us our clinical input. So Christian Heiss, who's a professor of cardiovascular medicine and a consultant at SASH, looks after the clinical medicine section. And in the CTU, I'm joined by Aggie Michael, who's a reader in medical oncology and acts as our medical director, and Hannah Hassanen for the CRF, who acts as our PI for the first in human studies that we do in-house. And many of you, of course, will recognize Ellen and Heather from RDS and Czech. Okay, so the CTU and Clinical Research Facility, the CTU manages trials, the research facility carries them out. There are a couple of pictures at the side there that just show you some of the facilities that we're lucky to have within our clinical research building. So you can see the ward on top and underneath an example of one of the sleep labs. And it's not unknown that we can have people within the building for quite long periods of time. We have run sleep studies where we've had people in these labs for 30 days. So, it's an exciting place to work. And we have a mixture in clinical trials units. I won't go through all of them, but one just thing to stress is just that it's not just about the statistics. It's not just about the science. There's obviously a whole array of multidisciplinary things that join together to do this. So we've got teams of operations staff, quality assurance staff, support staff, database programmers and developers, statisticians, and so on, who work on all of our trials, in particular work to support the trials within in the research facility. So other roles in terms of the longer you stick around in these kind of jobs, the more committees that you're asked to join. So I do my fair share of reviewing I'm an expert reviewer for the NIHR, so I judge applications for EME and the HTA. I've sat on the funding panel for RFPB, and last year I was very happy to join the UK College of Experts, or so-called College of Experts, who were judging the fast response COVID applications. You can see that there's a range of MDs and PhDs I support. These are all medically related and all jointly supervised with clinical academics. So, you know, it's a sense that, you know, massively interested in supporting clinical research, but it's always a combination with those who are appropriately qualified and expert within their areas. So then lastly, just what advice would I give to aspiring clinical researchers or academics? You know, so I think the first thing is to seek opportunities for research. You know, they don't always just come and knock on you. You have to knock on your door. You have to look for them. So, and that might involve collaborating and supporting other people's studies with a view to then taking more of a lead on your own. So I think being PI, you know, on other studies is you know, it's good experience to have before reaching out to lead a study for yourself. You know, build networks. You know, research is a collaborative, multidisciplinary activity, so it's not something which is done in silos. So you need to identify you know, the skills you have yourself, but also those skills that you may need to get alongside to make the research successful. So identify the support, research design service, obviously, CTUs, the CRN, wherever they are, and understand the research processes and infrastructure within the setting you've got. So, you know, research and development, ethics and funding. Importantly, for clinical academics that often wear two hats, sitting in trusts and universities, you know, have some idea of the differences in policies between the two, because, you know, it does sometimes matter which hat you're wearing depending on the approvals that you're getting. And then, you know, drawing to a close, appreciate the role of statistics. You know, statisticians are your friends, you know, methodologists. You're not here to take your research away or steal it. We're here to, you know, work alongside you. And you know, it's something important. You know, despite my love of trials, I can't lead them. I rely on those partnerships with academics, clinical academics. And then lastly, don't give up. You know, it often takes quite a lot of effort to get funding across. And, you know, the people who are successful are the ones who just keep at it and, you know, improving each time. So I think that's probably where I should stop and make sure there's time for Jackie to speak.